Dum, 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 dum. I don't see a light, but I'm going to start the meeting. The Planning Policy Commission meeting for September 10th. Before we start the meeting, I do have to say some guidelines. Due to the governor's proclamation, this meeting will be held remotely. The commissioners will put their comments or questions into the chat box and remember to introduce themselves every time that they speak. It is not on the agenda, but there will be a public comment at the end of tonight's presentation. As usual, if you have signed up to make a comment, please stay muted until we're ready to call you. If you have not called in earlier or plan on making a comment, if you want to make another one tonight, the information is on the agenda on the web. With that, I want to open the meeting at 6:38 and call the roll.
Okay. Janice Carl.
Here.
Jason Boyce.
Here.
Ron Fowle.
Here.
Bill Reinhardt.
Here.
Robin Buchers. No. And Joy Lewis has an excused absence tonight.
And I am here.
I apologize. You were at the top of the list. Sorry.
So we have a quorum. So the first thing on agenda usually is the approval of the minutes. Does anybody have any questions, comments, upgrades on the minutes? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. So I'm not sure who else is on this call besides Megan Curtis Murphy from the Sustainability Coordinator, Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner, goodness, I don't know where my throat is tonight, and Stephen Padua, Senior Transportation Engineer, I guess. I don't know if anybody else is on. I see. Kristen, could you tell me if anybody else?
Yes, this is Kristen. We also have Keith Niven and Andrea Snyder, our Deputy City Administrator, is on the phone. And we have one member from the public.
Okay, thank you. For the first order of business, we have a short presentation from Megan Curtis Murphy about the possible change from the River and Streams Board into the Environmental Board. So if she would please, Megan, if you would tell us what's going on.
Great, thank you. Yes, good evening. I'm Megan Curtis Murphy. I work in the Office of Sustainability. So we are originally scheduled to continue the discussion on the creation of the Environmental Board and the sunsetting of the River and Streams Board this evening. However, I'm here to ask the Commission to schedule a new hearing on this matter for September 24th. The administration received several comments and suggestions from both commissioners and members of the public at the August 13th meeting. Now we are working on incorporating these items into revisions on the board's objectives, the duties and responsibilities, and overall processes, including a new proposed process for community review of projects. So again, I'm here this evening to request a motion to schedule the new hearing for September 24th to accommodate these changes, and in order to hear additional testimony on the changes to the board. So we would then return to council for action on October 5th following that meeting, so as not to delay the creation of the board longer than that. So yes, I would ask for that motion this evening if possible.
So the motion should read to schedule an additional public hearing on this matter to be held before the Planning Policy Commission at 6:30 p.m. on Thursday, September 24th at 2020. Will anybody make that motion?
That's a lot to remember, but I'd like to make a motion to move to September 24th, the additional public hearing of looking for
How about
life.
if I repeat it for you, and then you
There we
can,
go.
to schedule an additional public hearing on this matter to be held before the Planning Policy Commission at 6:30 PM on Thursday, November 24th, 2020.
I'd like to schedule an additional public hearing on this matter for September 24th before the Planning Policy Commission at 6:30.
On September 24th. Do I have a second to that motion?
Seconded. This is Janice Carl.
Any further discussion? Kristen, you'll have to take the roll.
So I will start with Janice Carl. Commissioner Carl?
Janice Carl is present.
No, this is a vote. Yay or nay votes.
Oh,
For
regard.
the motion.
Oh, yay.
Jason, Commissioner Voice?
Yay.
Commissioner Fowl?
Yay.
Commissioner Reinhardt?
Yay.
And Commissioner Probola?
Yay. Motion
Motion
passes. That was easy. Now we go on to something a little bit more detail, and we're going to go back to the mobility master plan. And we have a presentation from the senior transportation planner, Stephen Padua. Stephen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all again. I'm going to switch to sharing my screen here. So tonight, the purpose of tonight's discussion is to go over the policies that are proposed in the Mobility Master Plan, which are to replace the transportation element in the comprehensive plan. As we do go through the policies, I want to pose two questions to you all that I would think will help with some of the feedback that we're looking for. The first is, what are the policy impacts on growth when it comes to implementation of policy, as well as what are the impacts on land use policy when we're looking at the implementation of the master plan. Briefly, I'd like to go through the background information and then jump into the policies for discussion. The master plan was originally discussed back in 2015 as a city council goal, which resulted in adding the task to the comprehensive plan. City Council then budgeted for the master plan and formalized the Transportation Advisory Board with the responsibility to support the development and the implementation of the master plan. City then recruited for the board and hired additional staff and contracted with a professional planning consultant to get the process started. On Tuesday night, the City Council approved the addition of the Mobility Master Plan to the Comprehensive Plan docket for 2020, which allows us to follow the remaining steps of the docket review process and propose adoption in December. Prior to tonight's meeting, the project team has reached out to the community for feedback in multiple phases and formats. For the Planning Policy Commission, it started with the joint board and commission meeting in April of last year. At that meeting, we discussed city priorities for the transportation system, which helped form the guiding principles. Later in 2019, I met with multiple boards and commissions, including the Planning Policy Commission, to discuss policy direction, as well as project team, while the project team was in the middle of the policy development with the Transportation Advisory Board. Earlier this year, a survey on policy changes was sent out to the boards, commissions, as well as the public to support the phase to finalize the policies and start the drafting of the plan. In July, the draft plan and a survey was released and sent out to all the boards and commissions for feedback. And last month, I was able to provide a very brief update on the Mobility Master Plan prior to meeting with City Council on September 8th. So for tonight, I'm going to go through each of the goal areas for discussion so that we can discuss the impacts on land use policy and growth, as we're now starting to look at implementation. We want to make sure we're considering a strong relationship between land use and transportation so we can better prepare for how the system will change over time. Please note, to simplify the presentation, I shortened several of the policy descriptions, so I'll describe the purpose of each of the goal areas and the policies so we can better discuss impacts. If you want to look at the exact wording for the policies, you can look at page 9 of the executive summary, and they're all listed on that one page. And as we walk through these goal areas, it's okay if you don't think there's actually any impact on growth or the land use policy. We're not trying to imply that there is. We just want to have the discussion so that we can have a discussion for the comprehensive plan update, but also to help us think about implementation as it starts early next year. So for these first three policies under proactive safety, it's all about adopting practices which are more proactive when it comes to improving safety for the transportation system. To help with this discussion, you can think about how neighborhoods get developed or not developed, and what areas you tend to not feel safe on, based on the roadway conditions. So one of my first questions is, what parts of our land use policy might not you feel safe on our roadways? Is it going to be residential areas where you need to walk or ride a bike? Or where the density is a little bit lower in the neighborhoods, there may not be sidewalks or bike lanes. Oftentimes the grid is not very well connected and the streets tend to be long and straight. On the other side of things, you might not feel safe riding a bike or walking in higher density areas where the blocks tend to be a little bit shorter, but you have more signalized intersections with higher volumes of traffic. So what are there growth impacts that might impede the implementation of these type of policies that any of you can think of?
I have a question from Commissioner Fall.
Yes.
So referring to your MMP 1.1, on figure 5 of page 46 of 241 in the PDF, I see a map, and is that map an actual heat map of collisions, of injury or fatal collisions for bicyclists, or is that for vehicles?
I'll have to, hold on, let me open up that map really quick. You said page 43?
Yes, page 46.
Oh, 46. Is this in the plan or the appendices?
This is actually in the plan. We'll see. It is, it's page 46, 41.
It's listed
And
at page 13 also.
It's figure 5, fatal and severe injury collisions.
I believe it's all collisions, including pedestrians, bicyclists, and vehicles. You're talking about this map?
Let's see.
The one that's figure 5, fatal and severe injury collisions?
Right. So if that's a heat map and it says high versus low, what's considered high? I mean, what are the numbers behind it? Are we talking like 2 or 3 a year? Are we talking about 12 or 15 or 20 a year?
So the heat map is referring to total collisions. So it's all collisions altogether. The points are referring to each of the fatal and serious injury collisions. And so the heat map is indicating all the other collisions that are probably more property damage or not as serious injuries related to the collisions.
Okay. So how many are we? I'm trying to wrap my head around what's a scope? How large is this? Because this heat map can tell me a bunch of things. It can tell me, 1 or 2, or it could tell me there's dozens, or we've got a systematic problem, which I don't think we have. But
We're going to be taking a closer look at this as we're in the development of what the second policy, which is the adoption of Vision Zero, where we're taking a look at implementation of more proactive safety measures, as well as 1.1, where we're looking at the history of collisions. We're going to be looking at all that together so that we can get a better idea of the safety implications for all those locations, because a lot of the heat map may be indicating property damage, but maybe there are measures that we can take where we're able to reduce a lot of those type of collisions in those locations. Is that what you're asking about, Commissioner Paul?
Not so much. I was trying to understand the volume. When we say that high, what is high?
Off the top of my head, I don't have that answer for you, but I can actually get back to you on that, so that I can give you a more relative answer of what is considered high. But it is looking at the density of those collisions.
I would assume that it means that that's where most of the collisions take place. Not necessarily the amount, but that's where most of them happen. I don't know. Isn't there a screenshot, a chart in there that says how many accidents have taken place?
There is a chart that's in the executive summary that talks about overall collisions, but not at specific locations.
Okay.
But on the questions for the proactive safety policies, can the commission think of any implications of impacts or from land use policies? Any land use policy that might hinder at least the implementation of any of these policies?
I have a comment from Commissioner Carl.
Yes.
Sorry, this is Janice Carl. This is going back to the question that Ron had. If you look at page 107 of 241, there are actual numbers associated with collisions, etc., to give you an idea of scale. Sorry for the interruption.
I have a comment from Commissioner Boyce.
Thank you, Jason Boyce. So I did have one question, Mr. Padua, and that is looking forward and kind of into the future. And I know these are more like policy prescriptions, but is the city already thinking about possibly the influx of new people coming from Seattle due to social unrest, or also people choosing? I think they took a poll saying a lot of new Amazonian workers and other people, REI workers, Costco workers, are looking to make their homes. Issaquah was one of them that was high on the list as far as relocating. And as more people begin to telework post COVID-19, obviously we're going to see more density than probably even what we had anticipated. So I'm wondering, are these things also being taken a look at, or is it too early to tell with the pandemic still continuing?
It is something that the city is taking a look at, but it is still very early based on the implications of mostly it's rumors of employers wanting to set up more satellite facilities in outer cities, which could include having more employees moving out to a lot of the outside cities outside Seattle. But we haven't seen a lot of movement behind that yet, so it is still very early, but it is something that we are thinking about. Thank you for the question.
Any more questions? I don't see any in the chat box.
Okay, I can move on to the next slide if that's helpful. Like I said, if we can't think of any land use or growth implications, there may not be any. The next one, I'm sure there will be. So for these 5 policies, it's about coordination for what we're trying to achieve with city environmental goals. The first 3 policies are aimed at the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and the last 2 are more about the health and equity of our community in terms of transportation. As we grow and develop our transportation system, what concerns might you have related to climate change or even the quality of life of the community? And then, are there land use policies that might minimize transportation's impact on the environment? How about the health of the community? Is there any impacts that we could prepare for or think about?
So if you're looking at 2.2, how are you going to get what specific things are you doing to get that 20% reduction in vehicle miles traveled?
There's a combination of a lot of things that you do to reduce vehicle miles traveled. A lot is there's meeting a lot of our employer goals, getting jobs closer to a lot of the housing, as well as making sure that housing is built closer to the jobs. There's the improvements to a lot of the other travel modes that allow people to use other options beyond just driving their car, encouraging people to use more transit, encourage people to walk and ride their bike to local destinations. A lot of that has proven very successful to be able to get to large reductions like that.
So I think I have a question from Commissioner Boyce.
Yes.
Commissioner Voice. So how malleable, once this is adopted, is this document? Is this also something that can come up once a year for amendments? And the only reason I ask is because I think the policy prescriptions are great, and I think they're in line with what the city has wanted to do for a while. I do think we're going to be living in a different reality for a year or two. I don't think mass transit is something even our local, state, and federal government are telling people to do right now. You can see single occupancy cars are right now, they're kind of the way people are traveling, if they are traveling at all. So you don't have buses that are packed. Right now, we don't have sound transit, and it's probably going to take a year or two before people start feeling comfortable in those situations again. So again, I'm on board with all of you guys' prescriptions. I'm just wondering how malleable is the document as it moves forward to address some things that could possibly change from the vision itself, or it could just be a temporary change for a year or two. What's that look like?
So the city council has actually requested us to be able to look at the mobility master plan and the implementation every year for the foreseeable future, just because of the impacts of COVID-19 have made everything in terms of travel behavior very unpredictable. If we were to try to collect data now, it wouldn't make sense 2 months from now in terms of trying to predict how people are going to be traveling for the next 6 months. So early next year, we're going to be taking a better look at conducting a financial assessment, because that's something that we did last year, but it no longer makes sense. And the same goes for travel behavior. We're going to be having to collect new data potentially in the next year, probably not sooner than that, just because travel behavior is changing every week and every month. Especially as different employers are opening back up to allowing their employees to come back to the office at different times of the year, as more people are choosing to telework, or as schools are now allowing students, or eventually allow students to go back to school. So there's a lot of flexibility with the implementation of this, and so we will be taking a look at this every year.
I have a comment from Commissioner Coyle.
Thank you. This is Janice Carl. I've got two comments. One is, I think, kind of in direct response to your question about what policy implications this has. They all seem to really drive toward greater urgency of focus on higher density development and more transit-oriented development. So that's what I would think we would need to be focused on more intensively. And secondly, sorry, I'm distracted by the typing. Secondly, I think that although right now we're definitely seeing much more improvement in rush hour traffic due to current conditions, and we might anticipate that returning to normalcy, I think there's going to be a hangover effect with people not only companies encouraging more of their workers to work from home, but also people being loath to use transit until there are some concern, some of those concerns are addressed. And so greater emphasis on biking, e-bikes, etc., scooters, mopeds, whatever those alternative individualized transit mobility options are. I'm sorry, I've lost my last thought, but thank you. That's all I have right now.
So I see
Great.
that Commissioner Buchers has joined us and he has a question.
We have a follow-on to Commissioner Boyd's question. I'm confused as to the purpose of the document, the public planning policy memorandum that we're looking at. At one level, it seems to be high level, conceptual, kind of like a detailed mission statement. And then at the other end, there's a great deal of detail, traffic accident numbers, specific lists of road development plans that were approved or at least discussed a year ago. So what is it, at what level, Stephen, are you trying to establish this planning policy memorandum? Are you trying to make this an action-oriented document or something which gives you a schematic, an overview, a framework within which to operate once you can develop data that you think is consistent and perhaps will be perpetuated? Right now, that latter is probably not the situation. So I'm just a little confused as to the level at which we're supposed to consider this plan.
So just like the existing transportation element of the comprehensive plan, it's more about building that framework and that schematic for us to operate out of. One thing that the previous transportation element didn't really take into account, or doesn't, and it couldn't because we developed it more recently, is the citywide strategic plan, which is more of the implementation document for the city. So that's going to be more of the higher or lower, I guess, detail operations and implementation of what's defined, or at least what is framed in the mobility master plan. Does that help answer your question, Commissioner Buchers? You're still muted, so I'm not sure.
Sorry. Me.
You're muted again.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So I read most pages of the planning policy memorandum, and again, back to my comment, you've included considerable detail here, and so I think I understand what you just said. But then, what's the purpose of including all the detail? What's the purpose, for example, of including the traffic accident data, all the projects that? I'm not being critical here. I'm just asking. I'm trying to get a fix on where you want to go with this. Are we supposed to consider all the projects that you listed here as something in our response to whatever we're being asked to do? And if not, why include it here? Yeah, question. I'm still not sure where you want to head with this document and what you want out of us.
I'm looking for feedback on the policies, which is really the meat of the transportation element of the comprehensive plan. And that is kind of the primary purpose for me being here tonight, is to kind of discuss those and see if there's any implications of or impacts from growth or the land use policies that are in place. The inclusion of more detail, some of that is actually required by the state in terms of level of details that's provided in the plan. Other times when we provide more detail, it's to give context to why policies were put together and why we're focusing on certain policies, or why some policies are written the way they are. In terms of inclusion of the projects, that's also to help us give a framework for when we're going to the development of the capital improvement plan, to have a better idea of how we want to approach the capital improvement plan, but also prioritize it as well.
Okay, I guess I understand. Thanks.
I have a question from Commissioner Fowl.
Hi, thanks, Madam Chair. So question here for Stephen. Looking at 2.2 and looking at the document itself, you have 3 bullet points, which is on page 50 of 241. I don't know if you just used 3 bullets to keep things nice and tight and consistent, but would it be appropriate to add things from the mobility master plan in this section here, such as bicycle use? And the reason why I bring that up is because of e-bike use. So if we want to get people out of their cars, if we work with employers to make e-bikes affordable and give them charging stations, then we may be more successful in getting people out of their cars. As a commuter, having gone back and forth to Microsoft, the commute can be quite long and can actually almost decharge a e-bike. So Microsoft has e-charging stations there. We work with partners such as Microsoft and Amazon, which are not necessarily in our city, but would enable our residents to commute to those destinations and be able to know that they can get their bikes charged, and they would have a return trip home, and vice versa, working with Costco to make sure that they have the facilities and other employers in our city to enable that. Would it be appropriate to add something like an e-bike policy in this portion of your policy?
The answer to your question is yes. The purpose of the bullet points were actually to be suggested action items that will help feed into the citywide strategic plan. Like I was telling Commissioner Bukers, that is really going to be the focus of how we're going to be implementing and balancing our resources and scheduling out what action items we're going to be taking in relation to implementation of the mobility master plan.
Okay, thank you. Because I noticed down on 2.3 where it's talking about electric vehicles, you require electric vehicle charging infrastructure, new development, and altered buildings. That's kind of almost leading to the same thing when it comes to e-bikes, because you still need to charge them. We have big hills. And a dead battery going up the hill is a really hard bike to pedal.
Completely agree. Are there any other questions on these items, on these policies? Should I move on to the next goal area?
There are no questions. Please move on.
Okay. Okay, for these 3 policies, they're aimed at the infrastructure we put in place, but also what we want to maintain. Thinking about the balancing of improvements to our system, should we be more conscious of what we want out of our system, what we need to maintain, and what can or cannot be accessed? As our community continues to grow, what impacts do you see on our infrastructure? How might this impact or be impacted by land use policies, as well as, is there something that might make it difficult to improve the transportation system?
I guess I have a comment.
Yes.
When I read through the paper, a couple of numbers just jumped out on me, and one is that you're expecting 50% more housing than we have now, which comes out to about 8,000 more homes, and 75,000 square feet of commercial. My concern is that's going to happen before all of these great policies are implemented. Just a comment that just concerns me that we don't have the money, we can't do any of these things actually right now, but building is still going on, and we're still asking people to hopefully bring in more commercial, more jobs, and it just concerns me that all these things cannot be done, but we're still adding more to our job growth and residential housing. I don't see any questions.
Thank you for the comment, Madam Chair. A lot of the growth that Issaquah's experience is a lot of the same growth that a lot of our surrounding or neighboring cities are experiencing. And in my experience working with my colleagues with the other cities, their transition to more of a multimodal system is rough. And that's the experience by all cities moving to our multimodal system. But they all understand that there's not much more of a choice. We're running out of room in terms of building the roadways. And we're limited, like you were saying, on resources. And so being able to use the roadway we have in place now more efficiently is one of the better strategies to implement. Now, there are methods to be able to get to a lot of this in terms of when you move to prioritize more non-motorized improvements, those are less costly than automotive improvements. When you make improvements for accessing transit, that's also less costly. And so we are able to do more with the prioritization of multimodal than just focusing on the automotive improvements. Not to say that we won't do automotive improvements. For a while, automotive is going to be one of the more primary modes to get around, but we still want to be able to improve the local access for people via walking, riding a bike, or accessing transit. Now, I think I saw a comment from Commissioner Bukers.
Yes. Yeah. Commissioner Bukers?
Have I unmuted now?
Yes.
So I noticed that back here to Commissioner Copeland's comment about a question about concurrency on page 44, and actually right through this document, there is concurrency requirements. There's apparently I was looking for a concurrency checklist, which I was yet to find. But in any event, so Stephen, given the problems that Joan has just put forward, what are the requirements regarding concurrency as we move forward in the city, given there is going to be a time discrepancy between what we can do, for which we don't have the money, in terms of roads and transportation and other facilities, and the building that apparently may well take place in this town. What are the requirements?
Commissioner Bukers, are you referring to state requirements around concurrency or the city's requirements on concurrency?
Well, I think both. I think both.
Okay.
I mean, yeah. So really both. We have a problem here. I mean, there's going to be a problem with timing, and so how do we deal with it and still comply? So that's really the question.
So when it comes to concurrency and the state requirements, if you look at Appendix E in the master plan's appendices, I can't remember which exactly page number it is, but page E has the concurrency checklist that outlines all of the state requirements around what should be in the transportation element and what should be defined for concurrency. For concurrency in the mobility master plan, not much really changed. We kept a lot of it the same because we didn't have the capacity to be able to take on a full concurrency overhaul or discussion of concurrency or making changes to it. That's something that we're going to be trying to take on in the next year or two, likely in 2022, in discussions with the Transportation Advisory Board and being able to implement more of a multimodal friendly concurrency system. And then can you repeat your second question?
Well, it's all around that. I'm not. I do find. Sorry, I didn't see Appendix F. I tried to understand what it meant, but as a novice in concurrency, can you translate how one takes that list roughly? I mean, without being too detailed, how one takes Appendix F and applies it to a situation where we have thousands of more square feet, let's say, of office building or whatever being developed, or more housing, and no capacity for financial or other reasons to develop the required roads or other infrastructure that would, I mean, how does one read that list and say, let's translate that into what we have to deal with in Issaquah going forward for the next 2 years. I just, as somebody who's uninitiated with all the details, it just looked like a bunch of words to me.
Sure. So when it comes to concurrency, it's based on the level of service for our intersections, which is primarily around auto delay at the intersections. And there are trip generations that are applied based on land use assumptions or zoning, and trip generation, basically trip buckets that are assigned based on the land use. That's how we're able to determine the type of trips or the amount of trips some land use is able to generate, and our model is able to run the analysis on. And so that's how we come up with the estimated amount of impact fees that a developer might have to pay in accordance to what our concurrency says, but also the type of development going in. Does that help answer your question on that?
And I take it the city's requirements and the states are essentially the same, are they, or are there some differences?
So the state just requires that we have to have concurrency. The city's requirements on concurrency are actually dictating what the developers would have to pay, or what would need to get developed and where.
Thank you.
I have a question from Commissioner Boyce.
Thank you, but I think I answered my own question, so carry on.
Okay, I have a question since you brought up concurrency. So in one part of the paper, it says that we are now at standard D everywhere, or did I misrepresent that? And then in another one, you have that you're looking at B's and C's in some instances. So where are we exactly?
So one of the policies that I'm going to be discussing in a few slides is that we're going to be allowing that it is acceptable for our standard for certain intersections to downgrade based on multimodal incorporation. When you make it safer to walk across in signalized intersections, or use your bike, or you add in transit, that adds a little bit to auto delay. Not just for auto, but actually adds the delay for all users. So that was one of the policy implication discussion items that we had with the Transportation Advisory Board to say that that's acceptable in order to improve the multimodal use of intersections. Now, to answer your question in terms of where we're at, it depends on the intersection. Different intersections have different standards set for them. So it kind of depends on the location, I think, for your question, I think.
No, I just, when I read this sentence, it said we are now, everything is at level D. Is that correct? Based on exactly where we are now. And I know that there are going to be improvements, there are going to be changes, but right now would you consider every checkpoint a D? It's just yes or no.
Sorry, I was checking if I was muted. The answer is no. I don't believe all intersections are set at D. So either that's a typo or I need to clarify that information.
Okay. And my next last comment is I'm assuming since development is coming in and we have this beautiful list of priorities that we are looking at, policies, I'm assuming then when new construction comes in and applies for permits, you're going to go through and make sure that you're going to be able to accomplish these and not have a building over top of something that you're planning to do. I'm assuming that that's the way you're going to do this. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay.
There's still a lot more work that needs to be done in order to make sure a lot of these policies are enforceable. For instance, we're going to be having to take a look at our street engineering standards several times to make updates and upgrades to ensure safety is being enforced, to ensure that we're balancing how the system is being used and what facilities we're able to require developers to put in. But the answer is yes. With that, that is the intention of this.
Okay. I don't see any more questions on this slide.
Okay, I can move on to the next slide. So for these two policies, it's about being intentional and realistic about how we want to improve the pedestrian network in our neighborhoods. This is different for each of the neighborhoods, but thinking about growth, will it be difficult to implement these policies? Or when thinking about density in our land use policies, what should we consider for the pedestrian system? And for these policies, the facility type is supposed to be influenced by what's planned to go there in the future. Areas with higher density or with higher concentration of destinations tend to have higher volumes of people, which are going to be called for wider sidewalks, different types of sidewalks that might be accommodating different pathways, potentially a trail system if we already have pre-existing trails connected to the network. That's what these policies are based off of. Are there any comments or questions on them?
I don't see any questions from the commissioners, but you do have your work cut out for you.
Yes, I know. Thank you. Okay.
There is a comment from Commissioner Fowler.
Yes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Question for you, Stephen, or actually more of a comment. Oh, it's my dog. On the corner, sorry, corner of Sunset and 2nd Street, I've noticed that the school bus is constantly riding up on the sidewalk. I know that's not a policy thing. I just remembered I was going to escalate it, but you might want to know that it's a continual problem that I see very frequently when I am on my commute. That's it.
Can you better describe what the school bus is doing?
When the school bus turns right from 2nd onto Sunset, going up towards the Highlands, the back wheels of the school buses are riding up onto the sidewalk. And it's pretty consistent.
Yeah, we are in regular communication coordination with the school district when it comes to bus routes and impacts on infrastructure or mobility being get around Old Town. So comments like that are helpful. If you all don't know, we have a new system where you can submit a lot of these type of complaints or issues. If you go to the city website, it's easy to do, and it'll send the comment straight to, I'm going to do it, but it can send it straight to the engineers or any of the other city staff that are able to kind of act on that a little bit sooner.
Wonderful. I wasn't aware of that, but I can follow up with that too.
I have a comment from Commissioner Carl.
Thank you. This is Janice Carl. With regards to the policies and the potential efficacy of them, I feel like one element that may be overlooked here, and I think in a great many of the policies that we discuss, is outreach to the community and explanation of why we have to change our behaviors. Because building a complete pedestrian network will not induce usage of that pedestrian network unless we explain why we have to accommodate growth, why we have to change our behaviors in order to accommodate the Issaquah of tomorrow. So that's what I just wanted to throw out there.
Commissioner Carl, that's actually a really excellent point. And one of the items that will be added to the citywide strategic plan in terms of implementation of the master plan is going to be regular communication with the community on what this plan is and why we're doing it, which kind of goes into your point of what's going to be necessary to kind of reach that future system, and why, what's this transition period kind of look like between now and getting to more of a multimodal friendly system. And it is very important to explain the very close relationship between transportation and land use. Some of that does not, a lot of that doesn't really, one doesn't necessarily go without the other in a lot of ways. And building a pedestrian network is very important, especially when it comes to looking at your land use and looking at your density. Because like you said, density is much more closer to pedestrian use than just building housing units.
I have a comment from Commissioner Boyce.
This is Doug Yormick jumping in. Commissioner Buchers actually sent me a private message by accident to have a comment a couple minutes ago, so I'm just jumping in to announce him.
All right, I guess it's my turn then. In the context of building walking networks, it would seem to me that safety is a prime requisite for folks to be comfortable using sidewalks and other ways that may exist. So I'm just wondering if with this, we've got MMP 4.1, MMP 4.2, and 4.2 references, 4.1 references demand and context. And I'm wondering if it would be worthwhile to add in something about what context means, assuming that it might mean in part references to or building requirements and considerations around the issue of safety. I know my wife, for example, will just not go for a walk around here unless I'm with her if it's dark. She's concerned, even though there's plenty of roads to walk on and lots of sidewalks. To put that in context. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Vickers. So the first three policies we covered were primarily around safety. And the reason why we have that separated out and having it listed in each of these goal areas is to highlight the importance of it. And so even though it's not specifically named out in 4.1 and 4.2, safety is going to be a primary concern when I'm looking at building out the pedestrian network, but also the bicycle network, and also looking at access to a lot of transit facilities. And so to your first point about defining more about what the context means, some of that is explained in the master plan when talking about where these policies came from. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, it was. I didn't realize that. So I also unfortunately was joined late, couldn't get on. So I didn't realize you had spent time talking already about safety. So my apologies.
No, it's okay. I think that's a really important point, and something that I didn't necessarily say when I talked about the safety is it is more of an overarching policy that overlooks all of the different modes and the other goal areas. So thank you for bringing that up.
So I have a comment from Commissioner Boyce.
Thank you, Jason Voice here. This is really more of a comment for Mr. Padua and his team, and it really builds off what Commissioner Carlisle said. And I don't know if you guys could even use this in other areas of the city. I'm trying to think of those scan codes that you sometimes put up your phone and it gives you information. Possibly seeing those on land use action items, giving people, the residents, more information on the projects we're doing. Because again, I do think one of the things, and I know it's difficult, but communication is key. And that way people understand where their money's going to, what the city's doing. And at the streetery last week, one of these fine establishments had one of those codes to look up their menu. And right off the bat, and everybody has a phone. So they were able, very easy, everybody could look at their own menu right on their own phone. So just kind of building on the previous comment and just a suggestion. But again, I don't know. I do think communication is key, especially with a lot of the wonderful visions you guys have. And just thinking about the little question on the screen about impacts on land use policy, maybe that's a tool in the toolbox you guys could use in the future. Those little those scans, because again, everybody has a phone when they walk by. One of those boring land use signs that you read, but the city could give a lot more information, something more digital like that. So again, just a suggestion.
Thank you, Commissioner Vice. I think that's a great suggestion. We are always trying to explore new ways to get information out to the community. We utilize social media quite a bit. QR codes has been something that has been explored in the past for getting information out to the community. Oftentimes, it's very difficult to people passing by to want to whip out the phone if they don't have a QR code scanner. Or don't know what that is, they just have no idea how to get more information. And I know that's not everybody, but I know that's been an issue in, some of my own engagement in the past of having people to get that out. Because I think it's a great way to get large amount of information out, and it brings up the website automatically for you. But, we're always trying to explore different methodologies to get a lot of that information out. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, one thing that was funny is my dad was using it. He does not have a QR code scanner, and he actually just used the camera app on his phone, and it still came up. So I don't know if the technology is changing as far as QR codes, but again, just another way for the city to be able to get out lots of information to people, because I think the city's always on the winning side when you guys are able to give more information to people, because I do think a lot of these policies are great. And again, trying to explain to people what the green necklace is and the reasons you guys are doing this, and kind of explaining what's going on with COVID, I think it'll be helpful for you guys, for all of us.
Completely agree. Thank you.
So I have a comment from Commissioner Fall.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Perdue, I do have more of a comment or a suggestion. When the city has these outreach events, I do go to them, but the people that I never see go to them are the residents that I see almost every day that live in the public housing down at the base of my hill, which there are 2 large public housing units. And I see those residents walking all over the place, but they never show up to the city events. So I don't know how you would engage them, but I think they're an absent audience that may benefit from or the city may benefit from having their input, and also benefit greatly from being able to share input and yeah. Not exactly sure how to say it, but I think you kind of understand what I'm saying.
I do. Thank you, Commissioner Fall, for bringing that up. It is something that the city staff do talk about and try to figure out in terms of engaging all community members in the Issaquah community, because you're right, not everybody attends public outreach events or city council meetings or commissioner meetings or board meetings, and we want more of the public to be attending these meetings to be able to get feedback from them. And so we do try different methodologies. We're not always successful, but I think we're getting better at it, and I think we have a great team that's exploring great options for us. Because as a planner, I can't think of all the great outreach methods to reach different community groups, and I think that's helpful.
Hutchinson House is the one that comes to mind. I don't know what the other one is, but it's across from the salmon hatchery. Those are the residents that I see all the time walking around. So that may be a missed opportunity. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
So we do see a comment from Kristen. Do you want to make that?
I do not. This is Kristen. I do not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Seeing no other questions?
I can move on to the next slide.
Yes.
Okay, for bicycling, this policy is all about building out the prioritized bike network to connect each of the neighborhoods to major destinations. And built into this policy is also the identification of contexts and the environment to determine the best facility to implement in different areas. This is very similar to how pedestrian network policies are designed. My questions for these: how might growth influence the bike network, or do land use policy support or support this policy and the implementation of a prioritized bike network.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. So how might growth influence how or where the bicycle network gets built out? And the other part of the question was, do land use policies support or hinder this policy, hinder the bicycle build out of the bicycle network?
So does the bicycle network continue on to the trails?
Yes, Madam Chair, the trails are considered as part of the bike network, but because it's more of a multi-use system, it's not necessarily bike specific, even though it is part of the bicycle network.
I have a comment from Commissioner Boyce.
Hello, thank you. So one thing, just as far as looking at the list, bicycling, if we're building out lanes for bicycles and you have walking sidewalks, has anyone really discussed like the electric skateboards, the electric bikes, where people, I guess, can pick their lane, and you can have someone on a bike that's electric going 23 miles an hour on a straight, flat, level surface. So that, I guess it's kind of more of a question. I don't actually see that, walking, bicycling, but sometimes they mix, and you see a lot of these skateboards now that have motors on them. So I don't know if that's something that should be looked at or talked about, but I definitely see quite a bit of them. Actually, at the Streetery, I watched two people on skateboards fly through the middle of that thing on electric skateboards. So it was kind of funny because there's all these people trying to walk down the middle of Front Street, and vroom, vroom, here comes two skateboards with motors, moving. So
For most of the time, the discussions around e-bikes and use of our system is more about safety and the speeds that they travel. So a few years ago, the state passed a couple new laws that require e-bikes to be kind of classified under a new system. And so you have your class 1, class 2 bikes that can get up to either 10 or 15 miles an hour. And then you have your class 1 that get up to 10, class 2 that can get up to 15 or 18, and then class 3 that can go 18 to, I think, 20, 25. And what the new laws indicate is that class 1 and 2 are allowed to use bike lanes or sidewalks if there's no bike lanes, or share the road. Class 3 is primarily to share the road with vehicles or use the bike lane if it's deemed unsafe for to share the road with vehicles. With that said, similar to Commissioner Fowles' comment about looking at infrastructure to support e-bikes is something that's going to be looked at closely as we're building out the system, primarily around probably the trail system, more so as a regional connection than a lot of the more local connections. As we're looking at connections into a lot of the neighborhoods that are primarily built on hills, we're going to be looking probably closer to e-bike infrastructure or supportive infrastructure than just standard bike lanes. So to your point of, are we looking at it? Yes. And it is kind of built out as part of this priority bicycle network, but we have to kind of tailor it based on the neighborhoods.
So this comment from Commissioner Carl. No, Carl.
Thank you again. Just with regards to the synergy between our policies, I think that the fact that we have in so many of our other policies and land use goals, concentration of commercial development and high intensity development supports the amount of investment in bike lanes and other infrastructure for the bicycle network. There's a great synergy there. And again, communication to existing residents and potential residents in those high density areas is critical. And then I'd like to second, as a resident of Tallis, where one of my big hindrances to actually riding a bike or walking anywhere is the big hill into our neighborhood. I am actively looking at e-bikes, and so I'm thrilled to endorse that as a key opportunity to facilitate getting those of us on the hills off the hills and down into the valley without our cars. Thank you.
I don't see any more questions or comments.
Okay, I'll quickly respond to Commissioner Carl's comment, and then I'll move on to the next slide. I think that's actually a really great point. Communication to residents is going to be very critical in explaining why we're looking at certain infrastructure investments, particularly around if we're looking at e-bike infrastructure investments, which might be bike lanes, but it also might be looking at the charging stations or some type of infrastructure that allows sharing of the roadways where maybe a standard bicyclist might be going a little bit slower up the hill. Hills are very difficult, and I encourage everybody I talk to look at electric bikes, not necessarily as a great option, but also a very affordable option. I mean, in the last 2-3 years, e-bikes have, the cheapest bike used to be $6,000, and you can find one for $500 now, which is comparable to any standard hybrid bike that you might find at the bike shop. So I think you make a great point, and I think helping people understand what's even available is going to be one of the first tasks. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next slide. And I think there's going to be a little more implications when it comes to growth and land use, but for these policies, these are all about achieving the multi-layered transit system. To better connect our community to the region, we want frequent and reliable high-capacity transit. We want to enforce more active and sustainable community travel by prioritizing non-motorized connections and access to transit facilities. And we're trying to think creatively at how best to connect each of the neighborhoods to not just standard bike route or bus route, but also the larger transit centers where you'll get more regional connections. So are there concerns with the transit system as the community or the region continues to grow? And are there land use policies we should be considering or coordinating with more closely with as we explore new transit system elements for the Issaquah community?
Commissioner Fowl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Ms. Perdue, question for you, because I'm on the recovery task force here. With COVID-19, I'm seeing that there is some hesitation of moving forward with some MMP initiatives, and potentially one of those may be working with King County Metro or Sound Transit, because the ridership participation is low. If we, and I don't think the COVID thing is going to last long. I think it'll probably be maybe 2 years out, and then I think things will start to move back to normal, and ridership will start to pick up. I'm worried though, if we focus on the here and now when it comes to working with our transit partners, we may actually lose opportunity because it takes so long to work with them. I don't want to lose that momentum, so to speak. Are we scaling back on working with Metro because of the COVID thing, or are we still moving forward with the same enthusiasm, knowing that by the time we actually get over COVID, we'll have policies move forward, and regional transit partners will be able to start implementing some of these programs?
The answer to your main question is no, we're not scaling back how we're coordinating or how much we're coordinating with the transit agencies. We're still staying connected with them. The main issue at the moment is because of the pandemic and the impacts on transit ridership is that they are having to take another look at the system they're currently operating. I mean, most of you or some of you may know that they've made significant cutbacks on services going out to the entire region. And that has long-term implications. Right now, we're not even sure if what's currently in place is going to be the basic system now. So moving forward, as the transit agencies are continue to reassess themselves in the financial component of maintaining the system, they'll have a better idea of how to expand the system in the near future and in the long term. We are staying connected with them to ensure that we are communicating what the Issaquah community's needs are and where those needs are to keep the services that we have left, but also how to change those services to better serve the Issaquah community, particularly for the residents that kind of need a lot of the services or don't have the access now. That was a little long-winded, but did that answer your question, Commissioner Fall?
Yeah. I'm just worried that I don't want to lose steam. I understand about the COVID thing, and it too will pass. And working with our partners takes so much energy to get them moving forward because it's the dinosaur in the room. That if we pause because of COVID, and understanding they are under great stress too, I get that. I just feel that we're going to lose a momentum, and then we're going to need it because we're going to have these growth targets coming in. Now that I'm here that the state wants us to increase those growth targets, it may take so long for us to ramp things back up because there will be growth, and then they'll start going through growing pains again because they scaled their model down to, to meet their needs, and we took a pause, and so they moved on to something else. We lost the focus, so to speak. I'm worried that might happen.
So one of the main comments that King County Metro and Sound Transit have heard from a lot of the communities in the region is that, I mean, they understand they have to cut back on services, but both Metro and Sound Transit need to explore a lot of the more alternative services or other options that communities can explore to make up for a lot of the lost fixed route services that might be going or have gone. So there is some hope, even if with some of the services that we lost, that we might be able to pick up another type of service to support the community. And that's something that we'll be exploring as well.
Thank you.
Seeing no questions?
Actually, Madam Commissioner, I'm sorry for the interruption. Commissioner Bukers is having problems with his chat function and can only send them to me privately. So he does have a question, and I'm working with him on the back end to get that fixed.
Okay, should we go on to the next slide and wait till he is able to join us?
He's able to join. He asked a question, or he wanted to say that he had a question, but he's only sending the messages to me because it's selected to just send them to me. So I'm working with him on that, but he does have a question for Mr. Padua.
No, I understand that. Should we go on with the presentation until Commissioner Bukers is able to ask his questions? Do you think it might take a minute or two? Oh, there he is. Okay.
He should be able to ask it.
Okay. Commissioner Bukers.
Follow on to Mr. Paul's question. In this regard, this is specific light rail transit and the impact it will have on the city. I understand at present that discussions, analysis of possible scenarios to do with LRT have been put on hold. At least that's my understanding, correctly or incorrectly. That concerns me for the same reason it concerns that that unless we look at the various scenarios, the impact of the LRT in the city will be enormous for so many reasons. Yet I don't see discussion coming our way to that any analysis and the different scenarios involved will impact a lot of the plans and the ideas that are expressed here. So just to follow on with this question, your sense of how you're at the city trying to deal with that issue, which is a huge uncertainty. But nonetheless, anyway, my thought is we need to continue these discussions, analysis, and I'm understanding that in fact is not what's happening now. Any comments?
Commissioner Buchers, could you clarify what your question is? Or was it more of a comment? I'm sorry, you're on mute at the moment.
Okay, it's a follow-up to Ron Fall's question, specifically regarding LRT. What analysis, what considerations are being done now to accommodate the potential for LRT to this city and the impact that it's going to have, albeit that many years down the road? I understand the uncertainty, but it's such an important possibility that I don't understand how we analyze any of this without some incorporation of considerations of LRT. So how are you dealing with that at the city level right now?
So we are maintaining communications with Sound Transit when it comes to how they're doing their financial assessment, but we need Sound Transit at the table with us in order to be able to conduct a relevant analysis around light rail and its impacts and the land use around that. With that said, this is a very important topic for the city and for the administration. So we are exploring different options, how to make progress on that prior to Sound Transit being ready for us. In Sound Transit's typical time frame for planning out each of their projects, they typically wouldn't even reach out to us until 2026 for our light rail project, which is scheduled, currently scheduled in SD3 to be constructed by 2041. We're not going to wait that long. I don't think anybody else wants to wait that long. One of the items that was identified in the citywide strategic plan was to look at the development of a transit plan to have a better idea of holistically what our transit system should look like, not just citywide, but also how to support light rail. Maybe that requires taking a look at different routes, different routing to different areas, different services to serve different neighborhoods, all to better connect people to the high capacity transit that we're planning for in the future. That's essentially what we're doing now, is being able to look at that. But first we have to get through the pandemic and its impacts on the community first.
Thank you.
Nobody is in the chat box.
Okay, I can move on to the next slide. So for these last set of policies, they look at more of the automotive travel with a balanced perspective, that we want a system that still accommodates auto travel, but has one of the many options available for travel in Issaquah. There are certainly direct impacts on growth, on concurrency, that we'll need to take a look at. It's something that I had mentioned earlier. Well, what might be any implications or impacts from land use policy? As we think about a future system, do our land use policies support or hinder some of these goals?
So we have a question from Commissioner Fowle.
Yes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Perdue, question about the auto travel. This, in terms of 7.3 adopt parking management program, in the development of the core, some of our requirements for parking are very light. Like when the TDR comes in, I forgot what the parking requirement is, but I thought the TDR parking requirements were very, very light because we want those people to use public transportation. But when Atlas came in and we had reduced parking, their parking lot is mostly full. They do charge for parking, and I think so does Vail. But now there's a significant amount of parking, street surface parking, and there's now a significant amount of parking in the Safeway parking lot. And I don't have an issue with the landlord of the Safeway Gilman area to rent their spaces out to the apartment tenants because that's a way for them to be able to make some more money. But if we start developing our core with the same thought that we're going to try and push people towards using public transportation and not having a car, I think we're going to end up with streets with cars parked everywhere, and it's going to be a parking nightmare. Just based on what I'm seeing at Atlas, there are a lot of cars for that particular apartment complex, and that's not meeting the goals and expectations that the city put forth. They're finding a loophole, a legal loophole. It's a great opportunity for the Safeway landlord, but again, it's a loophole. It's not. Is that really working? Is that really what we want to move forward to? And have we thought about that?
And the item to think about is that the developments are finding loopholes and that parking is still in very much high demand. Is that what you're referring to?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Yes, we are thinking about that. We don't want that as you stated, it's not meeting city goals to be able to do that. But one of the, as I stated earlier, the transition to more of a multimodal system, it's rough, and there is a transition period. It could be a few years. For some cities, it's a decade or longer, and there is kind of a balancing act of what should come first or what comes next. And we don't have enough adequate transit to feed that area in order to reduce a lot of that parking demand. And we don't have enough non-motorized connections to connect that area to the transit center. And that's what a lot of these policies are really about. The adoption of the parking management program is more about how do we more efficiently manage the parking system in specific areas of the city. The core has parking requirements that, like as you said, they are lighter only because we are trying to build more of a multimodal system, but it's not fully built out yet, and it's not adequately served by transit like we want it to yet. Right now, it's served by maybe one or two local routes, if I'm correct. We really want it to be served by a lot of the regional crowds. That's really what's going to be reducing a lot of that parking demand. And putting a little more demand on non-motorized travel in that area is to be able to have it a little more transit dependent. That's something that we have to work towards.
So shouldn't we be trying to get guarantees from transit partners to be able to provide that infrastructure in a negotiation with the state? Because what if we build it and they don't come? We're screwed.
Absolutely. Getting a guarantee from the transit agency is very difficult, but at the same time, just like us, Metro and Sound Transit have long-range plans, and we maintain communication and coordination with Sound Transit Metro as they update their long-range plans. So as long as we are showing and telling them where our need is specifically, that is helpful to make sure that is their guarantee to say that's where they're going to be putting services. When they're able to do it, at this moment, it's hard to really say how expansion is going to look like for them for service because of the pandemic's impacts on their operations and their financial finances. But when and that's also part of the reason why we were pushing for development of some type of transit plan so that we can take a closer look at where exactly we want a lot of these transit services to go support a lot of this new development in the core, and what type of services do we want? Because one local route isn't cutting it, and isn't going to cut it with the future development. But if we are able to coordinate with Sound Transit or Metro to say Gilman, for example, needs more core regional services, then that's going to be actually helping us with a lot of that parking demand, as well as building the demand on the non-motorized side in the core.
Okay, so I don't want to go into a scope creep here on this question, but do we have a negotiation policy with Sound Transit and the state? If the state says, here's growth targets we'd like Issaquah to go ahead and move forward with, we say, great. We reach out to Sound Transit, they say, great. But is there a policy that helps us negotiate this kind of uncertain ground and to sort of cover our needs and our expectations so that if we do build something out, we have reasonable expectation or reasonable security from the state or ST3 to say, okay, you guys are doing good, we're on target, we need to meet our obligation and build you that infrastructure.
To your question about the policy, the answer is yes and no. Kind of tagging on what I had just said about their long range plans, getting the desired services that we want where we want it into Sound Transit and Metro's long range plans is their guarantee and their policy saying that they're going to be providing us those services. When they're able to do it is supposed to be in coordination with how the city develops, but it doesn't always match perfectly. A lot of our neighboring cities are great examples of that, where they developed the core and transit came and then developed afterward. There's never really a perfect timing to it.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Bucos has a question.
The questions being discussed fully in the conversation with Commissioner Fall and Stevens. Thank you.
So I just have one comment. I know that we're trying to transfer into a multimodal type of situation here in the city, but people are not going to give up their cars. They might get in the bus in the morning and you might cut down on the traffic, but they're going to come home, get in their car and go to the grocery store or go to the mountains or travel. It's going to be very difficult for people to give up a car. So that parking is still going to be necessary. And I think we need to look at that when we make restrictions on parking when you build a new complex. They're still going to need parking for those cars, even though they take a bus to work.
Madam Chair, I think that's a great comment. I'm sorry, were you done?
Oh, yes.
Okay. In the conversations that we had with the community as we developed the mobility master plan, we brought up the use of their cars and whether or not people wanted to use other modes. And what was interesting that came out of those discussions was the main comment was said multiple times throughout all the different phases in the development plan. A lot of people that we talked to are driving the car because they have to, not because they want to. And until the land use changes where we have higher density and people are able to walk to the grocery store a block or two away or walk to the transit stop a block or two away, we could move to a very similar system that some cities have where they allow rideshare vehicles to be in those high density areas, so people don't actually have to own a car. They could still use one and rent one. So I don't think cars are going to be going away anytime soon. But I think as we change our land use and as we change the transportation system, it changes what people are able to choose to use. And that, I think, has a bigger impact, more so than telling everyone they shouldn't drive their car. Because most people, I mean, to get groceries, I need to go drive my car and go get it. There's no way I can feed my 2 and 4-year-old with just a bike full of groceries. I need to load up my trunk and fill up at the grocery store, and that need isn't going to go away because I don't have a grocery store near me, or I don't have other resources that I could walk to or bike to on a regular basis. And so as we change the system itself, I think people are going to be choosing a lot different modes to get around, and we're not to say that we're not going to be thinking about auto as we're building out the system, because that, like I said, that transition is going to take a while before we get to that kind of perfect situation where people feel equally have equal access to walking and biking and using transit as much as they want to use their car.
So my daughter used to live in Norway, and they have 8-foot wide bike paths, and there's always constant people on there. They go to the grocery store every day, so they don't have huge packages to take home. But when you get on the roads are still packed. It's just a comment. So I have a comment from Commissioner Carl.
Yes, I just wanted to note the topic that you were just addressing, Joan and Stephen, was part of the conversation we had. I can't figure out how many months ago because this year is crazy, about parking in Old Town and the special concessions we made for parking requirements for neighborhood-oriented businesses, such as a small grocery store or a small cafe, et cetera, that was inherently attractive to foot traffic or bicycle traffic from neighborhood areas. And so that's one way we already have policy that's geared toward managing this chicken and egg problem.
And hopefully more people will come from outside of the neighborhood to support the small businesses. So you still will have that. Is there any more comments or questions? I don't see any.
Okay, I'll quickly go over next steps, and then I'll conclude my presentation unless there's any additional general questions or comments. This will be, now that the mobility master plan is added to the comprehensive plan docket, it'll go to the October 8th public hearing. And then mid-October, I'll be having a meeting with the Transportation Advisory Board on the final plan, as we start thinking about implementation in 2021. And then it'll go to the City Council study session in November, and then be proposed for City Council action as part of the comp plan update in December.
I want to take this time to say thank you to Stephen. I thought I don't think we made any changes, or maybe one minor one to include something, but I think everybody was happy with all the work that you've done and the Transportation Board has done. So good job, and thank you for your presentation tonight.
Yeah, thank you everyone for having me tonight. And like I said before, I mean, this is going to be a plan that we'll be taking a look at every year, and likely making adjustments just because it's new, and it's building a new process for us to kind of build into a multimodal system. So we're kind of be learning as we go. And so I really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to follow on and ask our senior planner, Kristen Leeson, to give us an update on what's going on with the comprehensive plan amendments.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I switched to a headset. All right. I'm going to share my screen with you. There we go. Let me go back up to the top. There we go. So that's really strange. I'm missing about 6 slides. Let me, hang on 1 second. Try something else. There we go. I apologize, that was strange. So yes, the rest of the comprehensive plan amendments, again, it's doing it. It keeps losing all my slides. Let me do it this way. So we have, can you all see this?
Yes.
Okay. So just as a reminder, these are our docket. So the docket was just amended, by the way, by City Council. We did not have the transportation element, adding the master mobility plan as the transportation element in there because the mobility master plan, once COVID started, the plan was that it wasn't going to move forward this year. So we did not include it on the docket. And then ultimately the decision was, yes, we want to move forward. So we just amended the docket to add that to our docket and that to add the transportation element to our docket. And that happened on Monday night. Our other amendments include land use element, talking about housing targets, job targets, population and household projections, and potentially remaining land supply and buildable capacity. But that depends on the county and how far they are able to make it with the growth capacity studies that we have submitted to them, and everything's been slowed down. I don't think that's going to happen this year. We have talked about the redesignations and rezones. Number 3 is to add a chart to the Old Town sub-area plan that shows status of implementation of the plan. Capital facilities element, there are some administrative changes, and then an update to the map and the transportation element, adding the mobility master plan, and that's what we just talked about. Tonight, we're only going to talk about some of the land use element updates, the Old Town sub-area plan implementation table, and the capital facilities element. So as of April 1, 2020, we added 623 units from 2019. We are 99% of the way to our target. And we only have 70 units remaining. We should hit that in 2021. I also removed the word permitted up at the top and removed issued down at the bottom because I talked to the Office of Financial Management just to get clarification. And they said, no, what they count are actually completed projects, not issued projects as it was initially understood. So that's the reason for that change. Job targets, we're doing well there. We added just over 1,900 jobs. This one's a year behind. So between 2018 and 2019, we added just over 1,900 jobs. We're at about 53% of our target. So we're right on track because we're just about halfway through with the targets go from 2006 to 2031. So we're just about halfway through. So we're right on track there.
Kristen, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
When the new facilities for Costco opens, how many jobs is that planning to bring in? You know?
I have it in a report, but not off the top of my head, but I do have that. I can get that to you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. The next one are the population and household projections. These are all part of the land use element. And this is really small. It's just too much information to put there. So some of the highlights are we now have 17,424 housing units in the city. Our population is 38,690. Our estimate for 2040 is that we'll have 54,000, just over 54,000. And I should note that what I sent you, I moved a little too quickly and I cut and paste for the bottom half of the table. Right down here for the bottom half of the table, I accidentally pasted the 2019 numbers in there, but that's been updated and I pasted the 2020. So that's what you'll see at our next meeting. Any questions about this one? Okay.
No.
The capital facilities element. Here we simply updated some ordinance numbers and dates related to those in the text. As far as the municipal facilities map, we added numbers 8 and 9, which now includes, so that identifies the middle school over in Tallis and the elementary school and high school up in Providence. We're also proposing to change the name from municipal facilities map to public facilities map because it's not just municipal uses that are identified, it's public uses. So, any questions or comments? All right, here's our map. Old Town implementation. Last year, I believe it was you all or City Council that asked us to add a table that shows us the status of where we are. So this is what we've done. If you'd like to, I'll go through a few of these. The architectural guidelines are in progress. Those are going to come to you soon. Some of these were complete. Some of the code revisions regarding height and allowing retail, those were complete. As I mentioned, the code revisions to increase impervious surface in the CBD and landscape were not done. The landscaping will be a part of Title 18, and the impervious surface, we're going to wait until the storm and surface water master plan is complete so we can better make sure that that is something that will work. We have, as Stephen just talked about transit and kind of where we are with them, that really hasn't started yet. Implementing, discouraging traffic going through Old Town, cut through traffic going through Old Town. That's an ongoing process, as Stephen mentioned. There are a few there that working with the Downtown Issaquah Association that have been on hold, haven't started. Part of the Front Street project to Alder has been completed. Phase 2, we're still waiting on some funding. Others are complete. Parking requirement, I think I told you this one, the parking requirements for neighborhood-oriented commercial businesses, that's been put on hold. We need to revise that just a little bit, but it's coming, Commissioner Carl. And then, yeah, a few of these just haven't been started. They need to wait on a couple of things. I also have the plan that's table for the short-term and the longer-term actions, but right now, because we haven't started any of those, it'll be included in the packet and in the Old Town Sub-Area plan now, but there was nothing to really present as far as that goes because we haven't started. Any questions on this one? Thoughts? I am flying through this. So next steps, similar to what Stephen just said, we have our public hearing on the 24th. It starts, but we will just be talking about the potential redesignations and rezones at that time. It'll continue until October 8th, at which time we will talk about everything that we have discussed tonight. On November 10th, we'll go to the council study session, and on December 7th, we are anticipating council action. So all we're looking for you tonight is is there anything that you see that you need from us before we start our public hearing process? And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. That was short and sweet. And I did hear that there will be a public hearing on the comp plan, but so there'll be 2 public hearings on the 24th. Am I correct?
There will be the public hearing that you all made the motion on tonight regarding the environmental board. And then there will also be the comp plan public hearing, yes. And that will continue through October 8th.
Okay. So I won't close any of them. They'll just continue. Okay. So there is the possibility of a joint meeting between the Planning Policy Commission and the Development Commission on what is the topic.
So the topic is the single family architectural standards for Old Town. And you all met on that. You had a joint meeting with the Development Commission. And then we went to the City Council. And almost the next day, COVID came. And so things were slowed down. And we want to just have another joint meeting with the Development Commission and Planning Policy Commission, potentially on one of the Development Commission nights, and have just to talk about what we talked about at council, kind of let you know which direction we're headed and just catch you up to speed. And we were looking at if we do a Development Commission night, potentially October 7th. Their meetings are the first and third Wednesdays of every month. And October 7th is something that we were looking at. October 21st is another possibility.
Comments from the commission? Commissioner Boyce, I'll get that right. Yeah. Do you have a comment?
I didn't.
Well, you took your mute off.
I was
And so I thought that was
just-
you coming in. You were just okay.
I was looking at my calendar, but since you have me unmuted, yeah, is September 24th the day of 2 public hearings? Does that seem like a lot? I mean, both of those are pretty big, right? So you have the comp plan, and then you have the environmental or the rivers and streams to environmental. Does that seem like some Herculean task? Is that a lot?
You're up to it. I will say, this is Kristen Leeson. I will say that on the 24th for the comprehensive plan, you're not making a decision that night or a recommendation. I mean, so yes, there could be lots of discussion, but that discussion can also be carried over to the 8th if need be.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that we all have time to process it all.
You can do it.
Okay, so we're talking the 7th or the
7th or the 22nd.
or the 22nd.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. The 7th or the 21st
Uh,
of October.
does anybody have any more interest in one date than the other? How about if I put up October the 8th and you go and you say yay or nay?
October the 7th.
Okay, October the 7th.
Okay.
Does anybody have a problem with October the 7th?
No.
Commissioner Reinhardt, I haven't heard from you tonight. Do you have a problem with October the 7th?
Nope, I put yay in the comments.
Okay.
I'm 50-50. I'm planning
Okay.
something, but I don't know if it's going to be in the first half of the month or the second half of the month. I'll know probably in about 3 days.
Well, that's not going to help us if we have to decide on a date this evening.
Put me
I don't
down,
have
yes, so we can have a quorum. And yeah, just I'll make it
We're
work.
not going to be making any decisions. We're just going to go over what we've already talked about, basically. So I don't think we'll need a quorum on the 7th, but it'd be nice.
I don't want to miss PPC. It's too important to me.
All right, I like the attitude. Okay, so Kristen, hearing no complaints, October the 7th would be a great day for a joint meeting if the Development Commission is agreeable to it.
Okay. I will double check with them and let you know for sure.
Sorry, what time do they meet? Not that it matters, but are they also 6:30?
I believe they have changed their time to 6:30. But again, it used to be 7, but I'll double check. I think it's 6:30.
The last meeting that I conducted with DC, it was 6:30.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any comments for the good of the order? With that, I'm going to call the meeting to a close at 8:25, and I thank you all for your participation. The next meeting, I think we should go by the rules that were set out, that you introduce yourself each time, and the only person who did that was Janice, and she flubbed up one time, so I was going to say, yay, Janice, but You didn't get there 100%.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I forgot. This was Ron.
Okay, with that, the meeting is closed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.